Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says that John Kerry is actively undermining U.S. policy with Iran. To better understand the gravity of this situation, let's take a look at the history of Iran. Stemming from the cradle of civilization in Mesopotamia, Persia was a megalith of art, science, logic, and reason. After the fall of Babylon, Cyrus II of Persia, commonly known as Cyrus the Great, was the founder of the first Persian Empire, the Achaemenid. He created the Charter of the Rights of Nations in 583 BC, wherein it was written that government would not reign over the people if they did not wish it. It would not force anyone to change their religion or faith, and it would guarantee freedom for all. Persia and Rome were great adversaries, but they were both overwhelmed by the Islamic Caliphate of Rashidun in the 7th century. Rome was able to survive, but nearly all of Persia fell to the Caliphate. Only the Dabiid dynasty survived and held on to Persia's mystical roots, traditions, and culture. A caliphate is a state of rule that imposes strict Islamic law and does not allow for other religions. It is the antithesis of Cyrus's Rights of Nations. The struggle between these two governing ideologies continued on for centuries, one side seeking to free the individual and the other side seeking to force them into submission. The end of the 18th century brought conflicts between Persia, Russia, and England. England took control of the local trade and brought the borders to where they are today. In 1921, a coup d'etat led by Reza Khan led to the imperial state of Iran. He made himself Shah and became a puppet of Russia and England. The people grew to be resentful. In 1935, under the influence of the Nazis, Persia became renamed Iran. In the 1950s, 75% of Europe's oil came from Iran, and the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which later became British Petroleum, only gave a small percentage of the profits to the Shah. In 1953, in an effort to take control of Anglo-Iranian oil, Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the oil company. Britain took Iran to the World Court over the matter and lost. But under Operation Ajax, the CIA overthrew Mossadegh and reinstalled the Shah as supreme leader, who gave Britain full control of the oil trade. While it was believed that the Shah was a puppet for Britain and the U.S., he was both westernizing Iran and restoring Persian culture from the days of Cyrus the Great. And by the 1970s, Iran was well on its way to becoming a free society. In 1979, the Ayatollah Khomeini, who promised democracy and not to impose too much Islamic law, led the revolution, and the Islamic Republic of Iran was born. In 1980, Iraq invaded Iran. The war lasted 8 years. Over 1 million people died, and Islamic rule became increasingly authoritarian. The Islamic Republic of Iran have often been accused of funding, training, and giving sanctuary to terrorists, and they have been developing nuclear weapons. One would think that the United States government would be ideologically opposed to the Islamic Republic. But after President Obama's mysterious Iran nuclear deal, wherein pallets loaded with billions of dollars in cash was secretly delivered to Iran, 2,500 Iranians were granted U.S. citizenship, and 14 Iranian criminal fugitives were released from U.S. custody. One is left to wonder, what exactly was the Obama administration up to? And in December, millions of Iranians took to the streets in several different cities and demanded an end to Islamic rule. President Trump has expressed his support for the people of Iran, but in what most would argue is a violation of the Logan Act, former Secretary of State John Kerry has seemingly gone rogue and has had several unauthorized meetings with top Iranian officials that both President Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo have called illegal meetings that undercut the White House. The objectives of the so-called deep state become far more clear and threatening when you see how aligned they all are with extreme Islam and the Caliphate.